The morning fog hung low over the valley, wrapping around the fence posts like ghostly fingers. Ella Ward stood on her porch with a warm coffee mug in her weathered hands, watching the sun struggle to break through the cold December mist. At 73, she had learned to value these quiet moments, the stillness before the world woke up, the way frost made everything look clean and new, even the old ranch that had been in her family for 4 generations. It had been 2 years since James passed, 2 years since the house had felt this empty, 2 years since she stopped running cattle, sold off most of the horses, and learned how loud silence could be. Only one horse remained. Her old mare, Dolly, too stubborn and too aged to go anywhere. The ranch felt bigger now and lonelier. Ella told herself she had made peace with it. Or at least, she told herself that every morning when she woke up alone. She took a slow sip of coffee and looked toward the eastern pasture. Something was moving near the fence line. At first she thought it might be a deer. Winter had made them bold, hunger pushing them closer to the house. But as the fog shifted, the shape became clearer. It was a horse. The animal stood still at her fence, head hanging low, body barely moving except for the faint shudder of its ribs. Ella set her mug down and pulled on her barn jacket. Her boots crunched over the frozen grass as she walked closer. When the horse lifted its head, Ella stopped cold. The eyes looking back at her were old and tired, but there was something else in them, a quiet awareness, a question. She had seen that look before in horses that had been pushed too far. Horses waiting to learn if this human would hurt them or help them. "Easy now," she said softly as she approached. "Nobody's going to hurt you." The horse did not step back. That alone told her how weak it was. Any healthy horse would have moved away. This one only swayed slightly, as if standing took all the strength it had left. Ella reached the fence and took in the full sight of him. Up close he looked worse. His coat was caked with mud. His mane was tangled with burrs. One front hoof was long and cracked. A rope burn circled his neck, the hair worn away in a cruel ring. But what stopped her heart was what rested on his back. A saddle. An old, weathered western saddle, cracked by years of sun and rain. The leather was dark with age, and tooled into the rear skirt, faded but still clear beneath the grime, was a name. James R. Ward. Ella's hand flew to her mouth. Her legs went weak as memories rushed in all at once. It could not be real. 23 years ago, James had ordered that saddle from Walter Barnes, the saddle maker in Red Creek. They had celebrated 30 years of marriage that year. James had insisted on full tooling and his name stamped into the leather. He joked that if he spent that much money, everyone would know it was his. James rode that saddle for 5 years. Then, one summer day at the county fair, it vanished. He had left it on a rack for 10 minutes. When he returned, it was gone. They searched everywhere. It was never found. And now it was here. On a half-starved horse, standing at her fence, 2 years after James had died. Ella climbed through the fence slowly, speaking in a low, calm voice. The horse did not move. She saw now that he was a gelding, likely close to 30. Once he must have been strong, a good ranch horse. Now he was only a shadow. She let him smell her hand. He leaned toward her, trembling. "Come on," she said gently. "Let's get you warm." She opened the gate and walked toward the barn without looking back. Behind her came the slow, uneven sound of hooves. He followed. Inside the barn, Ella worked with quiet urgency. She bedded the stall deep with straw and carefully removed the saddle, her hands shaking. The skin beneath was raw, with old pressure sores. Anger burned in her chest. Someone had ridden this horse until there was nothing left to give. She offered water slowly, then called the vet, Dr. Rosemary Carney. Rosemary arrived within the hour. One look at the horse told her everything. "He's in bad shape," she said, "severely underweight, dehydrated, infected sores. And he's old." "Will he make it?" Ella asked. Rosemary hesitated. "If you hadn't found him today, probably not, but he has a chance." That was enough. "I'll do it," Ella said. "Whatever it takes." That night, as the barn settled into quiet, Ella sat on a hay bale, watching the old horse eat small, careful bites. She thought of James, of the saddle, of the way life had brought something broken back to her when she thought she was done needing anything. She reached out and touched the horse's neck. "We're going to get through this," she whispered. "Both of us." In the days that followed, Ella moved through the ranch with a purpose she hadn't felt since James passed. The horse, who she had started calling Reggie, grew a little stronger each day. He still trembled when he walked, still slept more than he stood, but his eyes began to change. The dullness faded. A quiet spark returned. Ella cleaned James's saddle every night. She worked the oil into the leather the way she'd watched James do for years. The smell filled the barn and brought back memories so sharp she sometimes had to stop and steady herself. Her hands traced the letters of his name again and again, each stroke a reminder of the years they shared. On the 5th day, Reggie lifted his head when she entered the barn. On the 7th, he nickered softly at the sound of her boots. By the end of the 2nd week, he was eating hay with a steady rhythm, his ribs still sharp, but his strength no longer hanging by a thread. Ella found herself talking to him in the barn the way she used to talk to James when he worked beside her. She told him things she hadn't said out loud in years. How she missed waking up to someone breathing beside her. How she hated the empty chair at the kitchen table. How she wasn't sure she had anything left to give anyone. Reggie listened with the patience only old horses had. He chewed slowly, blinked at her in the quiet, and made the barn feel less like a tomb. But one question stayed in her mind. How had Reggie ended up with James's saddle? Ella called the county sheriff, local auctions, even distant ranches. No one had seen the horse. No one knew anything about a missing saddle. 2 weeks after Reggie arrived, the phone rang again. "My name is Linda Gibson," the woman said. "I saw your post about an old black horse. If it's the same horse, I think he belonged to my ex-husband." Ella invited her over. Linda arrived in an old truck, shoulders hunched, as if life had been pushing her down for years. Her hands shook when she stepped into the barn. When she saw Reggie, she stopped breathing. "Oh, Lord," she whispered. "That's Dash." Ella frowned. "Dash?" Linda nodded with tears in her eyes. "His name was Dash. My ex-husband, Frank, bought him about 20 years ago. He bought a saddle, too. Said he got a good deal on both." She moved closer to Reggie, who watched her with old, watchful eyes. Linda reached out to touch his neck. The horse leaned into her hand. "Frank wasn't a good man," she whispered. "He rode Dash hard. Too hard. I left 5 years ago. I couldn't take the horse with me. I was just trying to stay alive." Ella felt her chest tighten. Some scars were deeper than the ones on Reggie's back. "What happened to Frank?" she asked. "He died 3 months ago. Heart attack. I came back to deal with his things. The horses were in terrible shape. One I got to a rescue. Dash was gone. I thought he died somewhere in the hills." She stroked Reggie's face and cried. "I'm so sorry, boy. I should have tried harder." Ella rested a hand on Linda's shoulder. "You were surviving. That counts for something." When Linda saw the saddle with James's name, she covered her mouth. "Frank must have bought it stolen," she said. "Lord knows he didn't care where things came from." Before she left, Linda signed over ownership of the horse. "He deserves better than I can give," she said. "Looks like he already found it." As winter deepened, Ella's world changed. Her quiet ranch became a place of purpose again. The barn lights glowed warm through the cold nights. Reggie's breathing was steady and calm. Dolly seemed less lonely with him beside her. Ella started riding Dolly again. At first, just for short walks. Sometimes, she led Reggie along beside them. His steps were stiff, but each week he grew stronger. The spark in his eyes turned brighter. On Christmas morning, her daughter Diana arrived with hot cinnamon rolls and a curious look. "You look different, Mom," she said. "Different how?" "Alive." Ella didn't answer. She didn't have to. One evening, after brushing Reggie down, Ella sat on a hay bale and let the barn settle around her. "I thought I was fine," she whispered. "I thought keeping busy was enough. But you showed up wearing James's saddle, and suddenly everything I buried came back. You needed saving, and maybe I did too. Reggie stepped to the stall door, resting his head near her shoulder. She reached up and stroked him gently. "We'll get through this," she said. "You and me." By February, Ella began to have an idea, a small one at first, but it grew every time she walked into the barn and saw Reggie resting peacefully. There were more horses like him out there, forgotten, misused, old, tired. Horses who deserved to live their last years with dignity. The thought took hold. It warmed her chest. It made her heart beat again. Maybe saving one old horse wasn't the end of the story. Maybe it was the beginning. By early spring, the ranch had begun to feel alive again. The snow melted into the earth. The grass returned in soft green patches, and Reggie stepped into the sunlight with a strength Ella hadn't imagined he would ever regain. His coat was richer now, his eyes bright with a calm wisdom. When the breeze rolled through the valley, he lifted his head and breathed it in like he was learning how to live again. Ella's idea from winter never left her. It grew every time she fed Reggie, every time she cleaned his stall, every time she saw him rest peacefully without fear. She began reaching out to rescues and old friends in ranching communities. She spread the word that she had space for senior horses, the ones nobody wanted, the ones that had given their whole lives to people and now had nowhere to go. The first horse to arrive after Reggie was Buttercup, a gentle 30-year-old mare who had outlived her elderly owner. Then came Pepper, a gelding with arthritis so bad his last ranch had threatened to put him down. After that came Dancer, an old Mustang who had gone lame and was no longer useful. Each time a new horse arrived, Reggie stood at his stall door and welcomed them with a soft nicker. They calmed when he was near, as if they understood he knew their pain. He was their anchor, their steady old guide, the horse who had walked through darkness and come out the other side. Ella hired help. A young woman named Jenna came to work at the ranch. She had just finished her training in equine studies and fell in love with the place at first sight. "This is special," Jenna said one morning as she watched Reggie in the paddock. "What you're doing here matters." Ella smiled. "I think James would have wanted this." By April, Reggie was strong enough to carry a saddle again. Ella brought out James's saddle, the leather now soft and restored, the name on the back clear as the day it was made. She hesitated at first, running her hand over the letters of his name. For a long time she thought the saddle should stay untouched, a memory, a relic, something kept safe. But the more she thought about it, the more she remembered James's voice. He always said saddles were made for work, made to be part of a horse's life, not to sit on a shelf collecting dust. Ella saddled Reggie carefully, placing a thick pad beneath to protect his old scars. The old gelding stood still, patient, almost proud. When she mounted, the saddle creaked in a familiar way that struck her right in the heart. It felt like James was there with her, guiding her hand, steadying her seat. She rode him across the property, slow and gentle. Reggie moved with an easy gait, steady and sure. Tears blurred Ella's vision, but they were warm and full of gratitude. "James," she whispered, "I wish you could see this. Your saddle came home. It brought me a horse who needed saving, and it brought me back to life, too." They rode to the eastern pasture, where James had always said the sky was widest. Ella looked out over the land she had shared with him for 52 years. For the first time since he passed, she didn't feel alone. By summer, the ranch was no longer simply a place to live. It had become a sanctuary. Ella filed the paperwork, made it official, and named it Second Sunset Ranch. The name came from something James used to say. Every morning is a chance for a second sunrise, but every evening is a second sunset you can be grateful for if you lived the day right. The ranch soon held 12 senior horses. Some came tired, some came scared, but all of them found peace. The town supported her. Volunteers showed up. Donations arrived from faraway states, and every single horse who stepped into the barn settled when they saw Reggie, as if he carried the calm of the entire ranch inside him. Months passed. The seasons changed. And one quiet September afternoon, when the leaves were starting to turn gold on the aspens, Ella stood outside watching Reggie graze in the paddock. He was 31 now. Old, yes, but strong, proud, whole. Dr. Rosemary stopped by for a checkup and leaned against the fence beside Ella. "When I first saw him last winter, I didn't think he'd survive a week," Rosemary said softly. "But look at him now." Ella nodded. "He saved me as much as I saved him." That evening, Ella saddled Reggie again with James's saddle and rode to the eastern pasture. The sun dipped low, spilling warm colors across the wide western sky. She dismounted and stood beside her horse, one hand resting on the saddle, the other stroking Reggie's neck. "Thank you," she whispered, "for coming home, for carrying his saddle, for needing me, and for showing me I wasn't done living." Reggie turned his head and gently pressed his muzzle against her shoulder. Ella looked up at the sky filled with the soft glow of the setting sun. "We did good, didn't we, James? You, me, and this old horse. We made something new out of what life took from us." The wind moved through the grass like a quiet answer. On the 1-year anniversary of Second Sunset Ranch, the barn was full of visitors. Families walked through the stalls, children reached out to touch Reggie's soft muzzle, and Ella told his story. How a starving old horse appeared at her fence wearing her late husband's stolen saddle, how saving him brought her back to life. How the saddle had come home in the most unexpected way. As the last guests left and the sun slipped behind the hills, Ella walked to Reggie's stall one more time. He lifted his head and gave his gentle nicker, the one that always warmed her heart. "Good night, old boy," she whispered. "Thank you for finding your way home." Then she turned off the barn lights and stepped into the soft darkness of the evening, knowing deep in her heart that some miracles arrive quietly, on 4 tired legs, carrying the past into the present to build a future you never knew you needed.